Hi everyone, it's Juan and welcome back to another video. If you're new to my channel, I review a new book every Saturday, but I also put up videos where I talk about books and reading in a more general way. And today I'm here to talk about classics. This is not my first video about classics, and I am sure that it will not be my last. But today I wanted to talk about classics in a way that I don't think I have done before. I know from experience, from my own personal experience as a reader, and also from some comments I get here, that some people are intimidated, a little bit intimidated by classics, right? But I also know that a lot of people want to read classics, or if they have already read some classics, often they want to read more. Another problem is that apart from being intimidated by classics, some people just don't know where to begin and how to go on once they've begun. So I thought I would make a video about this, a sort of guide to classics, if you like. In this video, I want to address people who want to read classics, obviously, but if you already read classics, you might still find what I have to say useful. That's my hope anyway. And you might also want to contribute your own ideas on how to begin reading classics in the comment section below. So please, if you have any suggestions, feel free to add them in your comment. Now, making a video like this is not easy for me. Why? Because there are many ways to go about it, and there are also so many things I could say. So I am sure I will keep coming back to the issue of classics in future videos. One thing I decided not to do in this video is to define what a classic is. Why? Because that itself could be the subject for a whole video, and one that I am actually very seriously thinking about making at some point. But just for today, I am going to work under the assumption that we all agree, that we all know what a classic is. So what this video is, right? This video is meant to be a practical guide for people who want to get into reading classics, whether they have already read some classics before or not. And your background is totally irrelevant. I think everyone who reads and everyone who enjoys reading can read classics. I said exactly this, or something similar to this anyway, in a recent video about why I read classics, and I will say it again as many times as necessary. But in this video, I am not going to talk about why I read classics again. If you want to hear my thoughts about that, all you need to do is check out my other video, right? In this video, what we will do is that we'll get into how to begin reading classics. I'm going to assume also that you already know why you want to read classics, and you are here to know where to begin. So, okay, the first thing you need to do even before you pick up a classic is you need to get rid of any prejudices you might have about classics. If you are intimidated by classics, you need to get over that, and I am here to help you with that, okay? Some classics are more accessible than others. You will find some classics more engaging than others, but I am sure that that also happens when you read contemporary fiction, right? You don't like everything you read. So classics are no different, should be no different. The only objectively difficult thing about classics is the language, because over time some words become old-fashioned, others just change their meanings completely, and that can sometimes make reading classics more difficult or confusing than reading, say, contemporary literature. But today, and this is the good news, I am going to recommend some accessible great classics that I think most readers could enjoy, and if they are a little bit perhaps less accessible, I will try to give you the key to them here. And not to turn this video into a commercial, sorry about this, but you know, I do have another suggestion. If you want to read more classics, what you could do is check out my weekly book reviews, because while not all the books I review are classics, a lot of them actually are. And my reviews are designed to be for both people who have read the books I review and people who have not read them. So whenever I include any spoilers, which is not always, I always leave them to the end of the video, and I always announce very clearly when I am going to start talking about the plot. So my weekly book reviews can also work as book recommendations. So I am going to link to the playlist that contains all the book reviews I have done so far, no matter when you are watching this. And I do hope you check it out. But let's get into it now and start talking classics. By the way, all the books I'm going to talk about were either written in English originally, most of them, or if they were not, they are now widely available in English translation. Okay, I think the 19th century and the early 20th century are good time periods because the language hasn't changed all that much since then. It has changed a little bit, but not all that much. And I think anyone who reads contemporary novels should have a relatively easy time reading the books I'm going to recommend today. Now, the first classic, and I'm really excited about this, the first classic I have is Ethan Frome by the American novelist Edith Wharton. Ethan Frome was published in 1911, so over 100 years ago, which actually is not a lot when it comes to literature, but that is not the only thing that makes it accessible, of course. Ethan Frome has a very engaging plot, and with less than 200 pages, it is a shortish novel. Ethan Frome is set in New England. There's snow, there's an easy to follow, beautiful yet sad story, which I won't go into a lot of detail about right now, obviously, but I will say the following. The main character, Ethan, in the novel is a farmer whose wife is extremely sick. He is sensitive and has a deep connection to nature. Ethan's life, as you can imagine, is sad, you know, working at a farm in Massachusetts while looking after a sick wife cannot be easy. And the only thing that brightens up his existence is his wife's cousin, Maddie, who comes to stay with them at some point. Now, Ethan develops feelings toward Maddie. And if you want to find out what happens, you need to read Ethan Frome. I'm not going to tell you here. What I will say is that the novel is so intense and short, it's so compelling that I challenge anyone not to finish it in just one or perhaps two sittings. And you know, that's saying a lot because if you watch my videos, you know that I advocate for slow reading. But Ethan Frome is one of those novels that is so hard to put down and so short that I think you would breeze through it. And now that I am talking about Ethan Frome, actually, I'm wondering why I haven't reviewed it yet here on my channel. So I might see if I can schedule a review of Ethan Frome soon. But if you're interested in the work of Edith Wharton, I have reviewed her great novel, The Age of Innocence, recently. So I am also going to link to that up here somewhere as well. Okay, let's go back in time now. The next novel I have for you is completely different, and it was published in 1818. And it is one of those novels that most people have heard about. I am talking about Frankenstein. I don't think Frankenstein is actually necessarily one of the best books I have ever read, but it is most definitely one of the most fascinating ones. You know, one solid reason for me to read classics is to understand modern references to them. And from that perspective, Frankenstein is a must-read because it is referenced so much, not only in literature, but also in popular culture, that I think it's interesting to go back to the original and see what it is about. And the only way to do that, of course, is by reading the novel that a very young Mary Shelley, I think she was 19, began writing in Geneva, Switzerland, in the company of fellow English romantics who were no other than her own husband, Percy B. Shelley, and Lord Byron. So Frankenstein, tells the story of a young scientist, Victor Frankenstein, who, in his godlike ambition, makes a creature as part of an experiment to make a sentient and sapient being. Frankenstein, the novel itself, draws from an earlier myth, that of Prometheus, and that's why the novel's full title is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. Now, in Greek mythology, just in case you don't know, Prometheus is a Titan god who give us mortals fire. So in a way, he is responsible for scientific endeavors, because without fire, us, mortal people, would have stayed in the darkness, both literally and metaphorically. So the myth of Prometheus has been reinterpreted differently, as you can imagine, through the ages. But for the Romantics in the 19th century, Prometheus was a rebel who in some ways was seen to personify the ideals of the French Revolution. However, we can see Frankenstein also as a cautionary tale on the dangers of taking those very ideals too far. Also, some people see Frankenstein as the first science fiction novel, and he has also some Gothic elements, so I think Frankenstein would be appealing for readers of contemporary science fiction or horror, but not only. Another classic, let's change gears now, another classic that you would have heard a lot about, I'm sure, is 1984 by the English writer George Orwell, which was published in 1949. That's a novel that originated the concepts of Big Brother, Room 101, and many others I'm sure you have come across. I feel, however, like a lot of people who talk about this novel or use some of those concepts have clearly not read the novel, and I am thinking mainly about some politicians and some journalists. So don't be like those people and read 1984 so you can see for yourself what those concepts meant and how they are used in the novel. But before you pick up 1984, you can also check out my spoiler-free review of it and see if you think it will be worth your time. And I say this because I do think that 1984 is one of those novels that everyone needs to read at some point in their lives, but I also think that everyone needs to decide why they want to read it first. 1984 is a political dystopia that will never get old, unfortunately, and that makes it a must-read in my view. Now, all the books I have recommended so far are hugely different, as you would have noticed, but they all have one thing in common. They all have compelling plots. Now, I have chosen books with compelling and relatively fast-paced plots on purpose because I want to challenge that misconception according to which all classics are boring or slow-paced. Of course, you know, some classics are slow-paced and wordy and boring, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that in my book, but because this video is supposed to be an introduction to classics, I have decided to focus on books whose compelling plots make them accessible to a more general public, whatever that is. Now, I also think that there are classics for everyone. If there is a particular genre or style you like in contemporary fiction, I think looking for a classic that would fit that shouldn't be difficult at all. And that can also work as a tip if you want to get into classics. Look for classics that fit your existing reading interests. But of course, I also think that it's always a good idea to expand your horizons, and classics are a great way for that. So I hope you find at least some of my suggestions appealing. But let's keep going, right, and giving you more suggestions. So another great yet accessible classic is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. It is another short novel and the most recent book that I am actually going to recommend to you today because Giovanni's Room was originally published in 1956 and it focuses on the recollections of a character named David, an American character named David, and the recollections that he makes of his time as an expat in Europe, and particularly of his relationship with another man, Giovanni, in Paris. Now, I must have been 18 or 19 when I first read Giovanni's Room, so I would recommend it to younger readers. Not to children, of course. My recommendations are generally not suitable for children, but I chose Giovanni's Room not only because I think it is a great book, but also because it shows the variety you can find in books that we now consider classics. But if you want to read something older, if your idea of a classic is something older, there are so many Victorian novels to choose from. I think that in fact, when a lot of people think about classics, they tend to think about Victorian novels. I do think, however, that Victorian novels can be challenging because of their length, mainly. Many Victorian novels were originally published in installments over several months, sometimes even years. So it can be a little bit overwhelming to read them back to back in a single volume. So let me recommend what is probably my favorite Victorian novel, which is none other than Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now, Jane Eyre has also a compelling plot and a compelling main character, Jane. Jane is an orphan who falls in love with the mysterious and sexy Mr. Rochester. But Jane Eyre is a lot more than a love story. In fact, the novel begins with Jane as a child, many years before she even gets to meet Mr. Rochester. So that makes Jane Eyre what the critics call a Bildungsroman, which in plain English means that it is a coming-of-age story. As such, I think it will work well for younger readers again, although I also think that Jane Eyre is the kind of novel that you can read at different times in your life and get something new out of it every time you read it. At least that's my experience. And I also recommend Jane Eyre because I think it can work as a gateway, and this is important, to other classics. Why? Because Charlotte Bronte wrote other novels that you will probably like if you enjoy reading Jane Eyre. And also her sisters, Anne and Emily, also wrote good, even great novels. So Jane Eyre has the potential of leading you down a rabbit hole of Victorian classics, which I think would be ideal for anyone beginning to read classics. And here comes another tip for you. I read a lot of Victorian novels and a lot of classics in general at college because I studied English, but I only read Jane Eyre, I think, after I watched a BBC television series adaptation of the novel on television, right? So my tip is that if you watch a TV or movie adaptation of a classic and you enjoy it, I think you should pick up the book it is based upon as soon as you can, because you are guaranteed to enjoy the novel even more than the TV or movie adaptation. And that leads me to another tip, which I think might get some pushback in the comment section, and that's fine. But I think I must share it because it really works for me. You know, a lot of people are against spoilers, and I do respect that in my book reviews. As I say, you know, and I think I said it earlier, I try not to include any spoilers in my book reviews, and when I do, I leave them to the last part of my review, and I make sure to tell people in advance that there will be a spoiler so that they can stop watching or skip ahead if they don't care for spoilers. But to me, you know, very few books would actually be spoiled by knowing the plot in advance. I think that unless I read a detective novel or something like that, I don't think knowing the plot would diminish any of the reading pleasure I get from reading. The reading pleasure I get from reading, okay, you know what I mean. So if, you know, if I thought so-called spoilers would spoil the fun of reading a book, I would never reread anything. And I love rereading books I love. So clearly, spoilers are not an issue for me. And when it comes to classics, you know, knowing the plot ahead of reading the novel can help me follow the thread and also focus on other elements other than the plot itself. If I know what is going to happen, I can focus instead on the language, I can focus on the characterization, the descriptions, the dialogue, and in that way, I actually get a lot more from reading classics. I think that the whole stance against spoilers, and even the word itself or how we use it now, comes from TV and film, and in those contexts it makes more sense. But when it comes to fiction, and particularly classics, I think knowing parts of the plot or even the whole plot will not usually diminish my reading pleasure. It wouldn't at all, actually. And I think it can often help me focus more on what I'm reading. I don't know if this makes sense to you or if you agree, but I have always pretty much felt like this about books in general and about classics in particular. But don't worry if you don't agree with me on this, because just the chance, just the possibility that one of you might not like spoilers is enough for me to be very careful with my reviews. Okay, do you want more classics now? Okay, so how about something not from the English-speaking world? There is a short novel that is filled with adventure and that is both fun to read and thought-provoking, which I think it's what a lot of people want from classics, right? And that novel is Candide by the French philosopher Voltaire. Candide was first published in 1759, so in the 18th century, and it is a book that I have been wanting to reread since I first read it a couple of years ago. I read it in French, and if you can read in French, you should absolutely read it in French too. But if you don't, I know that the novel is widely available in English translation, and I am also confident that the translations are very good because the language used in the novel is relatively simple, and the novel is written in a very straightforward way. So what is Candide about, really? Well, Candide chronicles the many adventures of the title character. And so if you want something fast-paced, Candide will not let you down. Candide moves around the world. Is fascinating, and some people might find the novel all over the place in many ways, but I think that is one of the elements that makes it so fun to read. But if you're in the mood for something perhaps more gothic, and that it is also thought-provoking and beautifully written, I think you could do a lot worse than to read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which was published in 1890. Now, a lot of people know this, The Picture of Dorian Gray, as the novel where a young man gets his portrait painted and then he stops aging while his portrait over time looks uglier and older. Okay, but of course, there is a lot more than that to this novel. You should know, by the way, that there are two different versions of The Picture of Dorian Gray available. There is one that most people would have read, which was the only one, in fact, available for over 100 years. And then there is this one, the uncensored version, that was only published for the first time in 2011. Now, in my review of the novel, which I'm also going to link up to, up here somewhere, I discussed the publication history of the novel in more detail, so I won't do that again now. But, what I will say is that The Picture of Dorian Gray is one of those novels, I think, that rings a bell to most people, but it will surprise you if you read it. And it is also one of those classics that continues to speak to us, among other things, because The Picture of Dorian Gray is about how superficial so many people are. And unfortunately, that has not changed since the novel was first published. Don't just take my word for it, but The Picture of Dorian Gray is an incredible book. Okay, the final classic I want to recommend to you today, and I want to recommend to beginners today, is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which was first published as a single volume in 1861. Dickens was an incredibly prolific writer, and many of his novels have been adapted to the screen. So it is highly unlikely that anyone watching this video would not have heard about Dickens or about some of his novels, at least. I have to say that I am not a huge fan of Dickens, and that I haven't read that many of his novels, but I think Great Expectations has everything someone wanting to begin reading classics needs. It's also probably the kind of novel people would expect from Dickens. For instance, its main character is a poor orphan, at least at the beginning of the novel. And not only is he an orphan, but he also has a cute name, Pip. Now, Great Expectations is in some ways a rags to riches story, and I think that would make it almost irresistible to most readers. The novel can drag a little bit at certain points, I'll admit that, but if you soldier on through the boring bits, you will find the novel is hugely rewarding and overall fun to read. Great Expectations can also be a gateway, and this is important, into a lot more classics, because if you enjoy it, of course, you will have not only all the many famous novels Dickens wrote to explore, but also those by his contemporaries. Writers such as Thomas Hardy, Anthony Trollope, Mark Twain, George Eliot, Edgar Allan Poe, William Thackeray, and my very own favorite Leo Tolstoy, among many, many others. So I hope that you will find my recommendations in this video and my tips useful, and that they will lead you to even more classics that I haven't mentioned here. There is really so much to discover out there and so much variety. My main goal in making this video was to give you some accessible classics and some tips on how to read them in particular, and classics more broadly. But please let me know what you think about this in the comment section below, as usual. Also, I would love it if you let me know which of the classics I have discussed in this video that I haven't reviewed yet you would like me to review in the near future, if any. Also, if you have any classics that you think would be suitable for beginners, please share them in the comment section. Let's help each other out here. I think this is all I had to say about how to begin reading classics today. So I am going to sign off now, but not before saying thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for liking. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for subscribing. You make my day. And I hope to see you again very soon for a new video. Bye.